Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board and the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.
Market Journal, Television for Agricultural Business Decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Ron Plain explains weak export demand for U.S. pork. We learn how the Trans-Pacific Partnership could impact ag trade with Japan. Lauren Giesler describes soybean seedling diseases that might be appearing in fields. And Al Dutcher forecasts weather for the coming week. University of Missouri Extension economist Ron Plain is our hog market analyst this week. In just more than a month, we'll learn about the current number of those animals in the United States when the USDA releases its quarterly hogs and pigs report. The next set of data on international trade will come June 4th, but export demand for pork has not been strong. We examined that topic when we talked with Ron Wednesday morning. We also discussed the cost of meat for the consumer and production in 2016. But we started by asking about the recent rally in hog markets.
We've done well, Jeff. We've had higher hog prices for 7 consecutive weeks, and most welcome by producers. We started off this year in red ink, and we're back in the black, and so that's good. It's not really surprising. Usually this time of year, prices are moving higher.
It's a seasonal rally then?
Yes, several things driving it. One, weights are down. We've had 7 weeks in a row with weights less than a year ago. That's less pork, and that helps. But the other big factor is seasonally hog slaughter declines as we move from winter into summer, and that means less total pork on the market, and that's the big factor that's pushing hog prices up.
How are these prices affecting break-even margins for the producer?
Well, the cost of production's mostly tied to feed costs, of course, and corn prices have been pretty flat. We're looking at break-evens around 50 cents a pound live for hogs, or 65 cents a pound on a carcass weight basis. But with higher prices, the bottom line's getting better. We probably lost $3 or $4 per head on average during the first quarter of this year. And now we're looking at profits 20, maybe at times $30 per head this summer. So much better performance than earlier this year.
You had mentioned slaughter weights, Ron. Is there a reason behind that drop in weights? I know they had been historically high, but the trend of 7 weeks below the year ago, is there a reason for it?
Well, largely because a year ago they were so very, very high. Last year was a record for weights by quite a bit. We had record high hog prices and real problems with the PED virus. Hog numbers were down, and so it just created an opportunity and an economic incentive for producers to feed them longer and bigger last year. The economic incentive is not the same this year. We've got much lower hog prices. In April, at times, hog prices were half of what they were a year ago.
The USDA has released its expectations on what the U.S. will produce in terms of pork. What do those numbers show?
Well, USDA says a lot more pork this year than last year. They're forecasting 6.8% more pork. 2 reasons. One, producers made money last year, and so fairings are up and more sows giving birth. The other big thing is the death loss from PED is down sharply, so we're looking at pigs per litter sometimes 6% or more higher than a year ago. So a lot more pork this year. For 2016, they came out with their forecast, and they're saying a tad bit, about 1.2% more pork is what they're predicting for next year than this year.
Tell me about the price of pork for the consumer, Ron.
Retail prices in grocery stores averaged at $4.02 per pound in the most recent month reported by USDA. My expectations, that's probably going to creep a bit higher. Normally, somewhere around September gets us the highest grocery store prices of the year, and this time of the year, the odds are a little bit higher. They're going to be moving up than moving down.
Let's talk about pork exports. How bad are they?
Well, it's not been good. The most recent data is for March, and we were down 9% in exports in March compared to a year ago. A couple of reasons. One is the dollar's been very strong over the winter. We've seen some weakness there, and that makes us more optimistic, and USDA is more optimistic also about pork exports in the second half of this year. The other thing is we had some labor disputes in West Coast docks over the winter that slowed exports, so things are looking brighter, but we're still far short of what we were moving just 9 to 12 months ago.
Are all countries lowering their buys, or are there still nations that are hanging in there?
Well, Mexico's hanging in there quite well. The big decline in U.S. pork exports has been shipments to China and Japan. Those countries, those two account for the total decline year over year.
All right, what's your price forecast here as we move into June?
Well, we've got carcass prices back above $80 on good days, above $60 on a live weight basis. We should stay here for several more months, move a bit higher possibly. I'd say the low 80s for June, July, August average on a carcass weight basis. That puts it somewhere in the low 60s on a live weight basis. Seasonally, probably start to decline once we get past Labor Day. And right now, we don't think the fall low in prices will be as low as what we had this past spring.
Next week, North Dakota State Extension economist Frayne Olson will join us to analyze grain markets. Nebraska Extension livestock economist Kate Brooks will also be with us to look at cattle markets. Over the past few episodes, we've shown you why Japan is an extremely valuable market for American agricultural goods. It's the top buyer of Nebraska's pork and beef and the biggest importer of U.S. corn and wheat. As Japan's largest supplier of agricultural products, future U.S. shipments could be affected by both a demographic shift within Japan and a trade agreement between multiple nations. First, Japan is shrinking. It has one of the world's lowest birth rates, and the USDA Foreign Agricultural Service says its population is aging faster than any other in the world. Second, the future of ag exports to Japan will be affected by the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. While details of the 12-nation trade agreement are either unknown or very complicated, the pact aims to regulate tariffs, labor rights, and environmental protections. For some American groups, the TPP could be a way to overcome some of the barriers in agricultural trade with Japan.
When it comes to barriers, there are many, and they go back many years, and therefore they're difficult to eliminate.
Understanding the nuances in ag trade between Japan and the U.S. is difficult, largely because not every product is regulated equally.
First of all, you've got tariffs that are rather high when it comes to agricultural products. I think the average tariff of an agricultural product in Japan is about 19%. In the United States, it's just a little over 5%.
U.S. beef, for example, coming into Japan carries a tariff of 38.5%. U.S. pork brought into the country is regulated under a gate price system,
which is a very complex way where you have to put together a container of products such that you hit like an average price. So you put high value and low value product together to come out so the average is such that you minimize the tariff.
The duties imposed to protect Japan's most widely grown domestic crop are huge. The USDA says imported rice has a tariff of more than 700%. Japan grows more rice than the United States, but under a favorable Trans-Pacific Partnership agreement, U.S. rice might be able to more cheaply reach consumers in Japan. Nebraska Extension Public Policy Specialist Brad Lubin says Japan is trying to protect its so-called 5 sacred commodities: rice, wheat, sugar, meats, and dairy.
These are commodities that have particularly high tariffs and high protections and limited access for products from the United States and other places. It's reducing barriers on those that would increase the trade opportunities.
For the U.S. beef industry, the TPP could help regain market share from Australia. As we told you previously, Australian beef currently holds 52% of the Japanese import market. It also has a significant tariff advantage over the United States. Signed in 2014 and implemented in January, the Japan-Australia Economic Partnership Agreement, or EPA, reduced duties on Aussie beef, giving chilled product a tariff 7 points lower than the U.S. and providing a 10-point edge in frozen beef. Since Australia is also part of the TPP, the agreement wouldn't give the U.S. an overwhelming advantage, but Cargill's Tatsuo Ishii says it would be a big deal, as the EPA has already helped change demand in the country.
If we offer the same price, Aussie always gets a better deal for our customers, so that we are facing a big trend that there's shift of the demand from U.S. beef to Aussie beef. Not only with that, but that's one of the reasons, so that once the TPP is signed up, at least we can fight with our competitors at the even field.
The exact details of what might happen to specific commodities under the TPP are difficult to predict. Several U.S. media outlets have recently reported the document is locked in a room in the Capitol basement where few people can read it, and those who do can't talk to the public about it. Itachi Corporation in Tokyo, which imports more than 100,000 tons of U.S. meat each year, says the beef tariff could fall significantly, but over an extended period of time.
It's not official figure, but the market is saying that the import tax will decrease to 10% more or less, but it takes 15 to 20 years, so it changed gradually.
Itachi Corporation does believe the reduction would be favorable and increase U.S. imports. However, as we noted, Japan's population is getting older. Marubeni's Kaz Nomura says this is an important note when thinking about how the TPP could impact future meat shipments.
Without fail, probably our import volume will increase. However, the Japanese market itself, the population is almost decreasing. And then the market scale or the market volume has not been changed, or maybe a little decreasing. So that is why, even if import volume will increase, I don't think it will be a big number.
The USDA's David Miller also believes a new trade agreement would improve America's ability to export meats to Japan. Even in other sectors, Miller says while the TPP might not considerably shift the market, it could make the process easier.
Some of the bulk commodities, the tariffs are at a much lower level, and they import huge amounts from us already. You won't see as many really big shifts in those areas, but to the extent that we can simplify the import procedures and some of the standards and those sorts of issues, we're going to see definite advantages.
A reduction in tariffs could obviously impact agriculture in Japan. Reducing duties on crops Japan grows a lot of, like rice, could change the market for what farmers grow. But just like the general population, Japanese farmers are also getting older. Of those living on farms and engaged in agriculture, 75% are over age 60. The U.S. Grains Council's Tatsuo Hamamoto believes there is another way demand could increase for Japanese products and therefore U.S. meats and grains.
It's not easy, but there is a market, huge market, on the back of Japan, China, and other Asian countries. They are really confident in the Japanese food in general in terms of the safety and quality. So we believe that there is a room for export of the Japanese agricultural products to those regions.
Nebraska ships 60% of its exports to TPP countries. It also ranks as one of the top 5 ag exporters in the United States. As a large supplier already to the Japanese market, Nebraska's future trade with the country will be impacted not only by the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but also by the ongoing demographic shift within Japan itself. Our coverage from Japan continues to be archived on the Market Journal website under the MJ Extras tab. You can find our reporting there on Nebraska's pork and beef exports to Japan, as well as Japan's uses of U.S. corn and soybeans. 56% of Nebraska's pastures and ranges is rated good to excellent, with another 31% rated as fair. But heavy rains may be making spring grazing difficult. Nebraska Extension forage specialist Bruce Anderson says special techniques are needed to limit damage on grasses. One way to do that would be utilizing a sacrifice pasture, putting cattle together in one small area until the ground becomes more solid and feeding hay if necessary. Bruce says this protects most of the pasture but could virtually destroy the area animals are on.
The worst thing you can do is graze a pasture for several days until it's all torn up and then move to a new area. Trampling that occurs repeatedly over several days greatly weakens plants. Doing this across a wide area can reduce production for months, even years. In contrast, pastures muddied up by grazing only briefly usually recover quickly. Maybe not as fast as when the ground is solid, but fast enough to minimize yield or stand loss. You can take advantage of this rapid recovery by moving animals frequently, at least once a day, to a new area. If this involves walking animals long distances, it might be better to subdivide pastures with temporary electric fences so you don't increase trampling during the moving process.
Bruce says fencing supplies you may have used on corn stalks during winter should work for this process. Then once the ground firms up, you can return to your normal grazing process. Soybean planting in Nebraska is behind the state's normal pace. The latest USDA crop progress report shows growers have planted 41% of this year's crop, 10 points off the state's 5-year average. 6% of the crop has emerged, half the average mark of 12%. Several areas of the state may be contributing to delays due to excessive moisture during May. Nebraska Extension plant pathologist Lauren Giesler says that extra rainfall could also be aiding the development of soybean seedling diseases. We talked with Lauren Monday on UNL's East Campus fields to learn more about what farmers should be aware of as plants begin to develop.
Well, I think one of the things, Jeff, with all the cooler temperatures, these excessive moistures in a lot of areas of the state, really conducive for a lot of our soybean seedling diseases, particularly those water molds or those ones favored by really wet conditions like our Pythiums and Phytophthora.
Tell me more about those ones that really favor the water.
Well, both of those need that free moisture to actually infect. They have spores that swim in water, so that's why, when we're in wet conditions, and particularly the cooler temperatures, we tend to see more Pythium. We will see some Phytophthora, but as our soil temperatures warm up, that's when Phytophthora will kick in more. Now, many of our growers know if they have histories with Phytophthora particularly, and hopefully they've got some treatments on or give them some good protection. But with these conditions, Pythium can be in virtually all of our soils. So when we're in cool, wet, they're going to have some stand problems if they're not protected.
What should growers be looking for as they do go out and scout, or at least notice problems maybe?
Well, if they're seeing significant stand reductions, or if they see, many of our growers had seed in the ground, maybe that seed doesn't emerge at all, we'll get some pre-emergent damping off. If some of it is coming out, and it's already been out, then maybe we'll see some post-emergent damping off, some of those seedlings dying in the field. What I always encourage them to do at this stage, at the seedling stage, if they're getting anything, to make sure they take some samples, make sure they get them identified correctly if they don't know what their problem is.
Why is it so important to identify them?
When we're looking at Pythiums, generally our seed treatments that come on the seed are going to be sufficient to give them some protection with Pythium. When we're looking at Phytophthora, we need a higher rate of a different component on there. So many of them have, for example, Apron if it's Syngenta, or Allegiance if it's with the Bayer chemistry or some of the others. But with those, they need a higher rate of one of those products depending on the company to get good Phytophthora control. Now, a lot of seed companies provide a low-level control with their general package. But if they have a significant Phytophthora problem, they may need a higher rate of that to get that seed in the ground and get it up, especially with these conditions.
I think it's safe to say that the conditions really vary across the state, and some farmers might be looking at replanting a field, but some might be looking at getting in there for the first time. What are your recommendations on using seed treatments in either condition?
Well, I think at this point, generally we'd say, as it gets later in the year, not to worry about seed treatments. Where we're still really cool, where our soil temperatures are not going up, or we get these cold fronts coming in, cooling that soil off with cool rains, I'd recommend a seed treatment if they have any history of a stand problem at all in that field. Now, as we continue, if they're in a drier part of the state, maybe not as needed, unless they know that they have a history of Phytophthora. And then the other thing is, when they're looking at replant, if they're doing a replant because they've had these really wet, conditions and everything, you know, I'd sure recommend a seed treatment in there. And if they know they have Phytophthora, if they have any indication symptom-wise that it's Phytophthora, they get a diagnosis that they use a rate high enough to get good control on that.
And how do you use this in a long term when you come back to soybeans in 2 years or 4 years or whatever the rotation is?
Field history is huge. So, you know, make sure they're keeping records on if they have whichever disease that they have, so that they know what they're matching up in the future. And I would just, from this point on, if they have a stand problem, I would use a seed treatment in that field, because history says that, you know, it may not every year pay, but in the long run, it's going to return. Just the fungicide part of that is what I'm talking about.
You can find more information on disease management in soybeans on the CropWatch website. We'll link to those resources on the Market Journal homepage. The May Nebraska farmer says Nebraska's dairy leaders are planning for expansion. With a growth of about 4,000 to 5,000 cows in 2014, Nebraska is on its way to reaching the goal of increasing its dairy herd by 30,000 head in 5 years. Industry leaders cite the availability of resources like feed, land, and water as an advantage over states such as California, which is the nation's dairy leader. You can read more about the expanding industry in the May issue of Nebraska Farmer. The deadline is approaching for applicants to the 35th class of the Nebraska LEAD program. The program aims to develop the next group of Nebraska's agricultural leaders and advocates. Members travel both domestically and internationally to visit with government officials and industry professionals. Group 33 completed its international trip in January to the United Arab Emirates, Nepal, and India. For those interested in the Nebraska LEAD program, we asked LEAD Director Terry Haney to explain what applicants should be hoping to get out of the experience.
Well, I think what they need to look for and what they should want to get out of it is an opportunity to develop themselves personally and professionally, and they're going to have an opportunity to learn from some of the very best leaders in our state, in our nation, and in the world, plus the classmates that they're going to be able to spend time with over that 2 years that they're in the program become a very big wealth of knowledge for them, especially with their classmates being located across the state of Nebraska. With Nebraska being so diverse, they're going to learn from each other.
You can find more information on the Nebraska LEAD program, including application resources, online at lead.unl.edu. Again, the deadline for the upcoming class is June 15th. And now with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension state climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. During this last month, of course, I've been on vacation and I'm back in the saddle again, and during my absence we have seen a variety of weather that you would expect during the spring, not this late in the spring, but what you would expect as you transition from the winter to the spring. Heavy snowfall across the panhandle, severe weather outbreaks consistently across the state, a few isolated tornadoes on several occasions, heavy flooding in the southeast, and then as you move to the south of us, there's where the real action is occurring. We have seen essentially across southern portions of Texas northward through central Kansas, almost 2 years with the precipitation deficits eliminated during the last 30 days, and now we're working on the third year of precipitation deficits. So we've seen significant reduction in the coverage of drought and the intensity of the drought, as one would expect. Right now, what we're dealing with is more of a hydrological aspect of this drought. We don't see any agricultural implications in terms of shortages of moisture across these regions due to the excessive rainfall. In fact, we need to see some drying conditions. And unfortunately, as you look out to the 30-day outlook just issued by CPC on Thursday, it does indicate above normal moisture will continue through the month of June with cooler than normal conditions from the central and southern plains northward into Nebraska. And that also continues for the summer months and also as we get into the first part of the fall months. So a wet pattern is firmly established out all the way into the fall according to CPC, as we have this El Nino that we're generating in the eastern Pacific that is expected to increase the monsoonal flow into the southwest and increase our precipitation consistently throughout the summer. This would be good news in terms of eliminating the drought completely across much of the central and southern plains, but it may cause some problems because of too much moisture and causing some significant planting delay issues, and then we have to deal, of course, with the wheat harvest, and this is causing some issues in terms of potential for wheat quality. But here in Nebraska, we're looking out this next 7-day period. We do have an impending system moving into our region that is expected to generate moisture, and then a couple other chances as we move later into next week. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see what we can expect. We'll draw your attention to this trough that generated the precipitation across the western part of the state yesterday. That is expected to once again generate scattered showers and isolated thunderstorms across the western 2/3 of the state through the first half of the day, and then we'll start to see some of that starting to spread into the eastern Nebraska as we go through the late afternoon hours, with some of the precipitation during the late afternoon and evening hours coming to an end across the Panhandle. But the heaviest of the precipitation and worst of the severe weather will be across the central and southern plains. As we go into Sunday, we'll start to see that precipitation move into central Nebraska and eastern Nebraska, and then as the afternoon progresses, we'll start to see that moving more into eastern Nebraska with clearing in the poor central portion of the state. And by Monday, we'll start to see the precipitation come to an end during the early part of the morning hours. Most of it will be confined to the upper Midwest, and right now we're not expecting a tremendous volume of precipitation in this region as it's cut off from the Gulf, but we will see some cooler conditions on Monday before we see yet another piece of energy movement across the central plains that is expected to impact northern half of Kansas and the southern 1/3 of Nebraska, with potentially up to a quarter, half-inch of moisture. If we get some thunderstorms that could be locally heavier, this system will rapidly move toward the east, and we'll start to see the ridge building in with a warming trend, moving back towards seasonal to maybe even above normal temperatures as we start to approach the 80 to 85 degree mark in the southwest. And on Thursday, it looks like we'll see the 80s well confined to the southern portion of the state, and southeast Nebraska may be actually pushing up in toward the upper 80s, and we'll start to see this trough moving in, which will generate some thunderstorm activity during the afternoon hours, and that will continue on into Friday. As the system pulls across the region, we could see a widespread convective outbreak coming across the state of Nebraska. In terms of temperatures, we are looking at cool conditions this weekend with heavier precipitation toward the western part of the state, and then we do see an increase in precipitation later in the week with warmer temperatures. 8 to 14-day forecast indicates that we will see fairly close to normal conditions from next Thursday to the following Tuesday, and in terms of precipitation, once again, heavy above normal moisture in our region.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews are available on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on hog markets, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, grazing wet pastures, and soybean seedling diseases. As always, you can follow Market Journal during the week on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Next week, Frayne Olson will analyze grain markets, and Kate Brooks will look at cattle markets. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board and the Nebraska Soybean Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
When we transform Nebraska corn into ethanol, it doesn't disappear from the food supply. It just takes a little detour. Ethanol is made from the starch. The rest of the corn becomes livestock feed to create meat and dairy products, corn oil, sweetener, and other food ingredients, and maybe a little carbon dioxide to make your soft drinks fizzy. Homegrown ethanol helps satisfy America's hunger for energy and the world's appetite for feed and food. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.